Oh, we need a tagline sometime too.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Yeah, we got to get a tagline. So when I say welcome to Surviving
Tag,
Danger
you're it.
Close, tag, you're it. No. Hey, welcome to Surviving Danger Close. I'm Jerrod.
I am John.
Dustin.
And we have a special guest today, Todd Koch from the Sheepdog's Mind podcast. Go ahead and say hi, Todd.
Hi. Yep. Todd Koch here.
I was expecting you to say hi, Todd.
Oh,
I was waiting for that.
Simon says.
It's too early.
Hey, you asked for this time.
Yeah, I know. I did.
Well, get it done and over with earlier in the day. We're not live today, so you're welcome to everybody who's
We
didn't have
are
to watch us
alive.
Barely.
Barely.
That's why they
Still-
make coffee.
Yes.
Right. That's. So today with Todd, Dustin, you want to start in what we're going to be talking about?
Well, quite a few weeks ago, back when we first started SDC, I was looking for a specific topic and found it on Todd's podcast. And they're nice and short, about 15 to 20 minutes.
I try to keep them pretty short. Yeah.
And so I got listened to them more and more, and then found out that you had a comment about a political leader in Michigan. We don't do politics, but may have agreed with you, and found out where you were at. You're not far from us, so we thought we'd get together on it. And you are a Air Force veteran?
Force veteran, yeah.
And also you ran K9, and I'll let you do your bio.
So my background is Air Force. I was bomb dog handler for 4 years. I was involved in the Noriega incident in Panama. Got out, became a police officer, started a dog program. I was at Canton Township for about 16 years-ish, I guess. Started their dog program, trained a bunch of dogs, and ended up leaving the department because of a post-traumatic stress injury. Did a couple other things, got my degree, my master's in counseling, and now that's what I do. So I help other people. And the podcast is geared towards what I consider sheepdogs. They don't have
define that to us.
Okay, so they don't have to be wearing a badge or a patch, right? To me, a sheepdog is anybody that would put themselves in harm's way for somebody else. Period. So that's kind of my gig is that's what a sheepdog is. So the podcast is geared towards mental health and sheepdogs. John?
You haven't said anything. You're unusually quiet.
I'm doing some quick research,
You're supposed to do that before the podcast.
It was a busy week.
You had yesterday off.
I had class.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The one thing that we'll get to in a few minutes is the EMDR. That is a process. What does that stand for? Because I can never get it right.
So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's a way
layman's terms.
What that means is it's a way to reprocess something that happened to you in a different way. I can get into that a little bit more as we go along, but we all have these things that happen to us. We also use the same techniques for other things now. Was originally designed by or understood and figured out kind of like by Francine Shapiro in the late mid-70s. But she started off with eye movement, so that's why it was named that. She just passed away a couple years ago, and she said that she would have named it something else because you don't have to use eye movement, it's bilateral stimulation. But what we think happens is it causes the brain to not kind of go offline. You can rethink about something that happened in a different way and change the way it looks and change the negative cognition that usually is attached to that. I'll give you an example. For me, it was one of the EMDR sessions that I did. A friend of mine was killed at the police department. My negative cognition was we should have done more. I could have done more, right? In reprocessing that, I realized there's nothing anybody could have done, right? He was dead at the scene. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. So why do I have to hold on to that negative thought? Well, I don't, right? So the EMDR lets the brain kind of stay in place to give you a chance to reprocess it and change that negative cognition to something more positive. It's really, really effective.
Okay. And this is something that you would do with a someone who's been trained in it. This is not something that any therapist you go to would be like, yep, we're going to start session one.
No.
You're going to build up to it. I know somebody's been in therapy for over 6-7 months now, and they're still just starting the basics.
Right.
And it's not something that you're just going to jump right into, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. You're going to be great in a number of sessions. This is where the employment, was it the EAP?
EAP, some people call it.
Yeah, the EAP is not. This is not geared for something like that. This is geared for anyone who's been through a traumatic incident. I don't care if it's veteran, first responders, or civilian. It doesn't matter. To help you kind of, if I use the word normalize, what you went through and react a little bit better.
The goal is to change the impact of the event, right? We don't make the event go away. And most veterans I've talked to, and police officers too, if you ask them, if I could make this event completely go away for you, this horrible thing that happened, would you want me to do that? 99.9% of them will say no, absolutely not. It's part of who I am now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but what this does is it just changes the impact of it. And you're absolutely right, Dustin. It's nothing we jump into right away. Two things have to occur. The person has to be ready to do it and willing to do it, understand it, and be able to self-regulate. And the therapist has to be able to trust that that's going to occur. So I won't do EMDR with somebody on a trauma until they're ready, they say they're ready, and they want to do it, and I think they're ready to do it.
Well, how do you even approach that subject, though,
Usually
to
it's,
get them to even say, do you want to do this? Do you approach? Do they approach?
Usually they'll come into the office, right? They'll schedule an appointment. They'll come in because something's going on. So, and that's when I'll do some assessments. We'll do a post-traumatic stress screen, which just is, do you have these symptoms, right? Is this what's going on? And once they check those boxes, I can pretty much garner, and I'll even ask, did something bad happen to you? And when did it happen? Was there more than one thing? Because it can be complex too. If there's more than one incident, that makes it a little bit different in terms of how we're going to treat it too. So they'll come into the office because something's going on. And then we'll just do the assessment. I'll do some talking to them. And most people are pretty honest. A lot of people do know, like, I had some shit happen when I was younger, and it's affecting me now. They don't usually understand why it's affecting them, but then I'll get into some psychoeducational stuff about the brain, the amygdala, fight or flight responses and stuff like that. And then we get started. Then it's a path.
So the main thing that I want to know that I wanted everybody to know start out, this is not something that you're going to go in and be done in 6 months. You may not even be started doing it in 6 months.
Depends,
because a lot of the time, and it depends on the person, but you have to know what's your trauma to own, number one.
Right.
And you have to be able to let go of your trauma. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, with trauma, because when we go through it, hey, this is my experience. This is what I'm doing. And a lot of people, somewhat general statements here, but from what I've seen, a lot of people, they've dealt with the trauma, say a veteran, first responders who maybe saw something in their first couple years and they're still dealing with it 13, 14 years later. They need to be able to let go of that trauma. When trauma comes with you for so long, correct me if I'm wrong, you start to identify yourself by that trauma. And once you're ready to let go, and it sounds like, yes, I want to let go of the trauma. It sounds like it's easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly. Because you're actually taking a piece of you that you have developed and evolved into your own
identity.
Exactly. And, just like the badge and the gun is your identity, so is what you went through. And when you're ready to release that, and sometimes you could probably get hung up on that.
Some people do, yeah. And some people get hung up on a statement that's happened more than once is if I am able to be okay with this, like it's not going to impact me like it does now, is that, does that mean I'm going to lose the memory of those people that I was with or what happened? And the answer to that is no. But it doesn't have to affect you the way it does, right? So it's not actually giving up what happened, but it's not letting it affect you in a way that just destroys you, right? Like it's changing, and it's changing the triggers too. So sometimes you might have, I'll give a police officer example, the smell of radiator fluid, right? Will usually take a copper back to a really bad accident, right?
Transmission fluid.
Yep. The smell of, people will be like, what? The smell of blood, the smell of metal. Metal on metal has a specific smell, right? So all those kind of things are triggers. Now, the EMDR process will not always completely get rid of that trigger and the impact it has. So you'll go through the EMDR process to lessen the impact, change the negative cognition to something positive. And then also, sometimes you're right, it takes a little while to work through some of those triggers. I'll give you an example. My personal example for me was the sound of bagpipes. So, funeral, right? I go back to, as soon as I hear any bagpipe, I would go back to my buddy Lou's funeral, which would take me back to the fucking accident, right? So I had to work through getting rid of that trigger, right? I did the process, so it's not impacting me as much, but the sound of bagpipes still would do that. So I had to figure out ways for myself to change that for me. So what I did, and there's a specific song that would take me back there. Now it doesn't affect me like it used to. It still has an effect, but not like it was. So what I did was I took bagpipes, turned on YouTube, and I listened to AC/DC on the bagpipes. Different song, right? It's a different song, right? But and it's a way to change it, right? It's a way to change it.
I've got a couple of Tartanic CDs if you guys want to borrow.
Well, I'm trying to think. I can't remember. There's one female group. There's like 3 or 4 of them that are all females, but they play heavy metal on bagpipes.
Yep.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they're amazing.
They're foreigners, of course.
Yeah, you have to be to do bagpipes, I think. I think that's like a requirement.
So changing that trigger, right? Making it change. And some of it's just kind of like a phobia, right? Like you kind of work through that, fear of a spider, fear of blood, or whatever it happens to be. You figure out ways to work through that to stop that trigger from impacting you. And that's still a component of figuring it all out. So for me too, the way I do therapy with trauma is it's not just doing the EMDR. There's another portion to that we do called RDI, which stands for Resource Development and Implementation. So we put resources into somebody's brain, basically, so that they can use those if we need them in processing the trauma. But after that's all over with, then it's mindfulness, being intentional, and I really do a lot with logotherapy, with finding meaning in the shitty things that happen to us. It's really important to find meaning in what we're doing and in what happened. How do we use that?
I think that's a good topic even by itself, because a lot of times, or my personal experience, when you go through a traumatic incident, we obviously perceive it differently than everyone else. Okay, so there are, like report writing. We're told, after a traumatic incident, you write just something down, right? Get it off your mind. It's not an official report. It's just a very, very rough draft. You get a sleep cycle in, more memories will come back. Now you can start your report after one sleep cycle. But then, after 2 or 3 sleep cycles, your memory comes back. But when you're talking about traumatic incidents, with mine in particular, it was a shoot, don't shoot type situation. And I was, even kind of still to this day, I'm angry. Like I didn't shoot, everyone else is fixated on what a great job that was done. But it's like, that's not at all how I seen it. It was, I should, my training was, even though it was impossible to make that shot, at least not without harming the victim, and it's just our own personal, I guess, how do I want to say it? Our personal interpretation of the trauma sometimes needs to be changed. The point of view needs to be changed.
And that's exactly, John, what we do in EMDR. We change that. We make it look completely differently. right? So, and with a lot of vets, we see a lot of moral injury, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
Oh yeah.
so we go through life as kids playing army in the backyard, shooting the bad guy,
Yep.
and the bad guy shooting at you. Well, we know in combat that's not how shit works sometimes,
No.
right? So you end up
No.
doing things or seeing things that you're like, holy hell, what did I just do, right? So it's dealing with the trauma, but also going in and working on that moral injury too. Yeah, and that's super important.
So speaking of our military vets, I never really, I didn't see it around me when I was in, and I retired in 2018. I didn't ever hear of it. Like we occasionally had complaints that come through leadership about, a subordinate that maybe you felt they were slighted based upon their race, their color, their gender,
Right.
things like that. But now you're starting to see a lot of it come forward with sexual trauma,
Oh yeah.
men and women being raped in the military.
Yeah.
Now, I understand it probably happened in some units that I was assigned to and led, but it never got brought up. So, what would you say to veterans that maybe had experienced that sexual assault? Would this be something that they could possibly use to help
Absolutely.
get through
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, for sure. I've done a lot of EMDR sessions with sexual assault victims.
That's a particular topic. Now that I'm retired, it never really came to the front of my mind until my daughter said, "Well, I was thinking about joining the military," and it's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Do you know how many trainings in the last 2 years of my career I had on state sexual assault?
Right.
Yeah.
So it is obviously a problematic conversation in the military, and
Right.
Unfortunately, there are still victims.
Yeah. Well, and I think
And-
that's
Go ahead.
well, to that point, there's a lot of victims that don't come forward, especially guys.
Right.
They won't
Yes.
come forward. If they get sexually assaulted and you're a guy, that's not supposed to happen, right?
Right.
So a lot of those guys aren't coming forward.
And
they
it's a
need to seek
trauma
help.
that has I don't want to say built-in secondary trauma, but exactly what you said. Especially if it's a guy, you've got that, and then you bring that up to somebody else, and the first person you bring it to is gonna be like, "There's no way, no, whatever." They're gonna be name called. They're gonna be downplayed. They probably won't get promoted,
Blacklisted.
blacklisted, and they'll probably even have to leave the unit before that will stop following them. And somehow, the military is all interconnected.
Mhm.
You can go to another base
yeah.
and somehow it's going to follow you.
Oh, everybody will know.
Yeah, and even same with females. I know when I was in, there was a situation with someone my wife had met where she was sexually assaulted twice. The first time they were taking care of it. Second time, oh no, you asked for it. And it was like, so now you've got the trauma of the assault, and now you've got the trauma of nobody's going to help me.
Right. Well, I've seen that a lot with sexual assaults. The first is the trauma of the assault. The second is the trauma of nobody believes me.
Mhm.
Right. That's a problem too. And sometimes it's working. Yeah, those become complex, and then working through those because there's a lot of negative cognition that goes with that. Then they start questioning themselves. Did I really do this? Well,
Right.
no, you didn't. It's not your fault. Right. The fact that somebody didn't believe you is not your fault.
Sure.
Right. So and it's working through those.
And
those
we've
topics.
had a couple for an agency that I work for. We have done a couple investigations where, unfortunately, it was a potential victim crying wolf. It wasn't through a long and tiring investigation. Now the officer has to come to the conclusion of, well, shit, now I've got to approach him or her and call her out on the carpet and say,
Mm-hmm.
this didn't happen.
Right.
I've done all my investigations, I've done my interviews, I've done my interrogations. Now I have the hard thing to do and call him or her out on the carpet and say this shit didn't happen.
Right.
And you better darn well be sure before you make that accusation that
Right.
your ducks are in a row.
Yeah.
And make sure your leadership is behind you on it, and you've gone to somebody else and somebody else. And
Right. Yeah, that's not a decision you make
Get
on
that
your
peer
own.
reviewed.
No.
Yeah, peer
No.
reviewed, and then peer reviewed, leadership reviewed, and make sure everybody's behind you on it, because that's a tough call. And because maybe that incident didn't happen, but
Right.
maybe that whatever the incident was triggered an incident back here, or they're full out lying trying to get somebody in trouble. I mean,
possibilities
That
are
happens
endless.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is say we've got somebody that listens,
Mm-hmm.
never been in therapy, but know they're at that point where, hey, I need help.
Something's
Okay.
got to change.
Yep. They know the signs. They're seeing the signs. Maybe they're on their 5th, 6th marriage and figured out, well, the only common denominator is me. You know, so you
He's
have
not talking
some-
about you, is he, John?
No,
Okay.
No, he's only on his 12th.
Okay.
I made a mistake
It's
once.
definitely not him.
And your current wife made a mistake once too, and she stuck with you.
Yeah, that's okay.
If she's
Well,
listening,
if she's stuck with him, she made a mistake twice.
oh, that's true.
Right.
She's gonna kill us all, but that's okay.
I'm married up. That's all I got to keep telling myself.
That's right.
That's what I tell myself.
That's what we all do.
So if my
That's
wife's
right.
listening, ding, that's a point for me. So you've got somebody out there that's, they know they need the help. What do you recommend that they look for when they call a facility?
Okay.
How do I basically want to take somebody from ground zero to where, okay, I need help, but they're scared to take that next step because you're talking to a perfect stranger,
Mm-hmm.
and you're supposed to, nobody knows. If you've never been in therapy, you don't know what to expect. So kind
Right.
of alleviate that for
Well, I
them.
think the thing to do is to go. The first thing I would do, I just did this for somebody out of state that I got a call. I actually got an email from a wife of somebody that needed help. I can't see him; he's out of state, and so the first thing I did was go through Psychology Today and look at the close therapists to him and ones that did EMDR.
Okay. For
EMDR
those
is
that
not
don't
for
know-
everybody, but go
For
ahead.
those that don't
Dustin.
know, Psychology Today is the publication, and they can get that online, right?
Yeah, it's online. If you just type in Psychology Today, you'll be able to see all the therapists. You type in a zip code, whoever's close to you, right?
Okay.
So once you do that, then pages and pages and pages of people are going to pop up. Therapists are going to pop up, and I would say start to look through what their focus is. And if the first person you're looking for is somebody that focuses on trauma, and then somebody that does EMDR, and they'll put that in their bio, basically their little bio, and you'll be able to tell by looking at these people kind of what you're looking for. And then I would call a couple of them and talk to them before I even scheduled an appointment, and say, hey, have you ever worked with this, or this? How many first responders have you seen, or how many veterans have you seen? Those kind of things. If they've never done any of that, might go to the next one, right?
Right. And I've shared that too. Is like, I have I started a peer support team for the county for all first responders, and several have reached out and said I'd like to start therapy, and I've kind of pointed them in directions, and the therapists have said, well, that I like that and I can do that, but to be honest, I've never worked with first responders.
Right.
And I even shared my doctor that I go to through the VA. He deals with veterans all the time, and he's from the U of M. And he says, I'm actually excited about this opportunity to work with a first responder because majority of the people he deals with is trauma that's 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
Whereas, first responder may have recurring traumas. So,
Yeah.
you really have to sort through who would be a good fit for you.
You do. Yeah. And then even on top of that, though, John, it's going and talking to the person that first time. And you'll be able to tell if this is somebody you click with or not. If it's not, move on. Right. Like, and
a therapist won't take that personally.
no, absolutely not. Like, we know not everybody's going to jive with me, and that's okay. Our focus is on getting you the best help you can. And if that means going to somebody else to get it, good on you. Go.
Because we have to build a relationship.
Absolutely.
If I'm going to share my deepest, darkest secrets with you, we better have a relationship that I trust you.
Yes.
And you're not going to hurt me.
Correct.
You're not going to manipulate those memories or traumas in a negative way.
Right.
And it's also, if they have a mole on their cheek that you just can't get over, we know, mental health as well.
Molly. Sorry.
I was trying to think of something else to say, but mole's the only thing that can come out.
I'm known for saying things that everybody's thinking. So
Well, I do
I
see
have no
that Jerrod
filter.
has up there the Black Knight. None
It's just
shall
a
pass.
flesh wound.
Right.
But if there's just something that you don't feel comfortable with as therapists, we're okay with that. Our goal is to make sure you are comfortable in the setting that you're in. So if you don't feel comfortable, and I don't care if you don't like the aquarium in the waiting room or whatever the case may be,
Right.
you find a place that's comfortable. It's
Yeah.
okay to quote unquote fire your therapist for the good reasons of, hey, Todd, there's something here I'm not connecting.
Right.
Can you help me find somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I went through 3 before I found one that I clicked with, and it's okay.
Mhm.
Absolutely okay.
I won't say how many I went through, but there's 2 initials. It starts with V and ends in A. That I went through quite a few of them before.
Yeah,
I
your
found-
VA story's horrible, dude.
Yeah,
It's horrible.
Well,
yeah.
I
I've shared
like
some of it with
I
you.
like
Yeah.
to think mine was pretty good, but then she retired, so I hope I didn't break her.
I think we've talked about this before, but I think we found her in that padded room.
Right.
Ramirez, keep him away.
Gwen, I'm sorry if by chance you hear this. I'm doing good. Look at me
So-
now. I'm coping.
So we've got somebody that now is comfortable with their therapist. They've had the initial, and in the initial one, it's going to be, dependent on from therapist to therapist, it's going to sound like almost an interrogation,
Oh yeah.
depending on how they do it. Some
just-
do
yeah.
motivational interviewing, and they can do it with more of a conversational style. The first one, you're not going to learn anything.
Oh, see, that's where I differ a little bit. I always teach my people in the very first session something. So if somebody leaves
Okay.
my office, I want them leaving my office with something valuable. So it might just be teaching them to do deep diaphragmatic breathing to calm the amygdala down. But if they
Okay.
choose to go somewhere else, at least they left my office with some kind of
Okay,
tool.
I like that effect,
Some
yep.
kind of
You know,
tool.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, because I have friends and or family that have went to a therapist and they left and they felt like they got nothing out of it. And the worst thing is when someone is finally ready to receive help, they go find somebody and they're like, well, that was a waste of time.
Right.
And I joke about Gwen, but the first time I met her, it was like an interview. Interviews are different than interrogations, but it was an interview, and she says, you
get
don't
him back
strike
for
me
that
to be a meditator. Sorry, Pat.
That's all right.
But she did give me a CD of kind of like some meditating. It was guided. There was a voice, on the CD. It wasn't
Right.
just in my head this time that was telling me, to concentrate on my breathing, and things like that. So even if I didn't feel that Gwen and I connected, which we did, she at least put something in my hand to put to use.
Right.
A tool that I can leave her office until I do find someone.
Right.
So I think that is a very good
It
point.
is important. But you're right, Dustin. Not everybody does that.
No, because I went through quite a few, and the only thing I learned is this person's not for me. And until I found my current one. But so we've got, you're gonna have to talk about your family history, medical. You're gonna have to talk about that. So unless you have a therapist, as Todd has said, that actively teaches from the get-go, you may not get a lot out of the first couple sessions because
Right.
they're bound. And now this is just my experience with the agencies that I've been with. They're bound to do an assessment, a full assessment, and then a treatments plan. And then the third one, the insurance is out of the way. They're paid. They're happy that they have this treatment plan. They have the assessment. Now you can get them out of the way and you can start talking.
Right.
So definitely stick with it. So once we get done with those first few sessions, what is it going to look like for them?
Usually, so you're right. The first couple of sessions are mostly information gathering. The more information I have about somebody, the better I can help them. And the other thing is, I can also find out other issues they're talking about or have that they don't even realize is a problem, right? I've seen several people where they come in for one thing, I start talking to them and find out, oh, your dad kicked your ass every day between the ages of 6 and 12, like with a stick. I mean, put you in the hospital, right? Like, okay, that's a problem,
Right.
right? That's a thing.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, that was normal. Like,
Right.
no, that wasn't normal, right?
That's
Like,
not normal.
right, right.
My normal
That's-
was fucked up.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So let's talk about that. How did that affect you? Is it part of that complex issue, right? So yeah, information gathering is just huge. So after we do that, then we start to talk about, okay,
Your cat almost died.
Yeah, they like jumping up behind people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, there's a cat behind my head.
Right.
predators, gotta love them.
Right. Windows
Sorry,
up,
Todd.
windows
Yeah.
open. The squirrels are running around outside. They want to
Yeah.
do what they
Yeah.
want to do.
We need a video for that because the cat, that would be priceless.
He's
Cat just
awesome.
appeared. I'm sorry,
Right.
Todd. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, it's all good. So I don't even know, where was I? I was talking about
That's my line.
oh,
Right.
so like the third session in or fourth session in, you'll start to talk about, okay, what are the things, right? And in what I do with the EMDR, I'll explain what EMDR is, if it's something you think you want to do or not do. Like, this is your journey, right? I'm just here as a guide to help you through it.
Sure.
So once they decide they want to do EMDR, then we start that process. And usually takes about 2 or 3 sessions to set it up. And then an actual EMDR session lasts longer than a normal session.
Okay.
So I usually schedule out an hour and a half or 2 hours, and it's exhausting. You're going to relive the entire event again with the same kind of body stuff you had, but it's going to be different this time. It's going to change. It's not going to look the same, but you're going to be tired. And then I usually, within 24 hours, talk to them or have them email me, tell me they're good. Because sometimes doing this process, other old memories will come up, or think you'll remember something that happened in the event. What I have people do is either write those down or just remember them. If they're disturbing, we have a place to put them in your mind. That's part of that resource development piece that we do. And if they're not, you think you can deal with them, you can deal with them, right? Or you can bring them in and we can talk to them, talk about it, the next time you come in. But sometimes things will pop back up over the next day or two. And then generally what starts to happen is about 3 or 4 days later, people are like, holy cow, I feel different. Like, this is not affecting me. And I'll give you an example without trying to figure out how to do this without outing my client. Let's take a person that was involved in a car accident when they were young, 17, 16 years old, driving through a subdivision similar to this one, hits and kills a little kid, is never charged. It's not his fault. Kid runs out between some cars, right? Now that person's 65, right? So this whole time they've had to deal with this and thought they had dealt with it pretty well. But so one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury is avoidance, right? So you avoid certain things. So he's avoiding subdivisions that look like that, not driving during that time of day, starting to think about it more and more and more and more as he's getting, older, and now grandkids are coming. Like, it's becoming an issue. So we do the whole process. We do the whole EMDR process. A week later, this person comes into my office and says, it's like a miracle. Like, I just drove during that time of the day in the exact same subdivision where this happened, and wow, I had no problem. Like, I can do it, and it's not affecting me. Like, I'm not affected the same way I was before. So it's amazing what it can do.
And that was after how many sessions?
8,
8,
maybe 9.
8 EMDR sessions or
No, 8 total
8
sessions.
total sessions?
Okay.
Yeah. The nice thing about EMDR is we try to do the worst or first. And sometimes when you do that, it helps take care of the other ones. Like, there's this trickle down effect. So the brain starts to figure out, I don't have to let this bother me anymore. So sometimes, even in complex, where you have multiple issues, we only have to do one, and the other ones kind of get dealt with.
Sure.
And on top of that, we're teaching coping skills, how to deal with those triggers, how to not let them affect you. So there's multiple things kind of going on. So you really don't have to do every individual event that occurred. Now, sometimes you have to do multiples, but not always. Sometimes what's nice about it is you only have to do the worst or the first, and it kind of helps with those other ones. It helps deal with those.
Because I think, speaking on first responders' behalf, when we experience traumas, I don't want to say every day, but frequently, and they compound upon each other.
Yep.
There comes to, before we started recording the show, we were kind of talking about how that, that's just what happens to you. You develop that thick skin, you get messed up as your career goes along, and then all of a sudden one day something happens, and you're like, well, I thought I dealt with that. That wasn't an issue. I remember just, what was it, a week or two ago, Dusty, that I messaged you, and I was like, what the hell?
Oh, yeah.
That came out of left field.
Yep.
And it was, I bounced stuff off of them because that's just where we're at in our friendship. And it's like, man, I didn't think that was a problem, and so, I just guess for our listeners, that can happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it does often. Like, so sometimes it's a life change that brings you back to something that happened before, right? I've got a really good example of that. A guy I know, his very first call was to a dad and a kid putting limbs in a wood chipper. Yeah. Kids ends up.
After that, you can handle just about everything.
Well, so I'm with this guy. This was with a different department. I'm with this guy 3 or 4 years after that. He tells me about the event, and I'm like, that doesn't bother you? He's like, no, not really. Didn't bother him till he had a kid.
Right.
Yep.
Now that changes perspective inside our brains. Now it's a thing, and now it's bugging them. So once that happens, go in and get that shit handled, right? I got a whole podcast on the unintended consequences of not dealing with your crap, right? Like, you put stuff on other people and your kids and your wives, and it's a thing, and that's the last thing we want to do. Right? You don't realize it. It's the last thing we want to do as first responders.
Right.
We're supposed to be helping people. We don't want to stick our junk on somebody else.
Right.
Right. So, and there's a lot of unintended consequences for not dealing with your stuff.
And another part, bring it up, is kind of the other side of that coin is knowing what is your trauma to own.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that I've learned recently. It's something that, okay, something happened to a victim. You get called for it, John. You're there. It's traumatic. You're trying to help. And then later on, you're like, man, well, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have patrolled this way.
Right.
Trying to think of all the stuff that, I'm getting.
You were turning and looking at John.
Oh.
I was having a hard time hearing you.
Jerrod, he's actively staring for Mr. Young.
I was trying to quietly get you to just
We're not
do
quiet
it.
here.
And you're like, what are you doing? What are those hand movements?
All I saw was, cheerleading going on over there. But you have someone who goes through it, and in your mind, you're trying to own it. Like, what should I have done? But there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And that's taking someone else's trauma and trying to own it. And I can see first responders doing that all the time. Parents of those who maybe their son or daughter's gone through something traumatic. Well, I should have, could have. And they're trying to own that trauma. It's separating what you own as your own trauma, because we all have enough trauma to deal with without taking everybody else's on.
Right.
So how would you work with someone on that?
That's the negative cognition piece. Right, that's that negative thought piece. Like, this I should have done this, or I could have done this, or something different. That's that. So in doing the processing, once we go through the whole process, right? So I'll just use John for example. So you go through a really bad situation, right? And your negative thought is this. We reprocess the trauma. So we do a level of disturbance when we start this process.
Okay.
So when we reactivate your sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system, to have you back in that trauma, right? I ask you what your level of disturbance is. And usually you'll tell me 8, 9, 7, whatever, right? The goal is to get you down to 0. So we reprocess and re-go through this. That's why it takes 2 hours, this event in your mind over and over and over until it goes from a 8 or a 9 to a 0 or a 1. Once that occurs, then we say, well, the negative thought initially when you were activated was I didn't do enough, right? We take that to now, what do you think? What do you think now, right? When we go from a 7 or 8 to a 0, well, now I think I did everything I could, right? So you change that cognition.
Sure.
And then we work on that, we put that in place, and that's the new thought, is I did everything I could, because that's the truth, right?
Sure.
So it changes the way we think about that, so we don't have to own it.
You know, and there's dynamics to that too. If you listen to Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, he talks about it briefly. When we think we could have done something differently, you have, in my opinion, you have to break it down to, did you do everything you could with what you had, whether it be knowledge, equipment, training. You know, and he talks about why the murder rate, this is what the conversation was about, why the murder rate has dropped in the United States. Well, it's not necessarily because there's less murders. It's because the training has changed.
Yep.
We have new equipment.
Right.
You know, 10 years ago, did everybody carry a tourniquet? No. And what are we trained? What are we told when we're issued that tourniquet? Who's that tourniquet for? It's for you. It's not for anybody else. That one's for you. And that's a sombering moment, kind of like when you're 18 writing your will. But anyway, you know, it's a sombering moment. But how many officers do you know, or anyone else, that when the time comes, they use that tourniquet and they don't use it for themselves.
Right.
They put it on someone else.
Right.
So that is why, you know, between the training and the equipment and all those things, why the murder rate has come down. But same thing, if we're looking at a scope of a traumatic incident, did you have the equipment? Did you have a tourniquet? No. Okay, so that wasn't even an option. Did you have the training of how to apply a tourniquet or make a impromptu tourniquet? No. Okay, so you didn't have that ability either. So part of it is processing it and realizing, like, oh, yeah, I can't look back 10 years ago and say, man, I should have done this, I could have done that, because that technology or that information wasn't available to you at that time.
Right.
But tell that to yourself now.
Right.
Right.
That's the
and
problem.
that's the trick, right? Yeah. Because if we could tell ourselves that now and just be okay, you and I, Dustin, would be out of jobs. Right?
There's enough screwed up people in our counties. We're good.
Man, no kidding.
Especially knowing where you work at. It's
We're crazy busy.
Well, you know,
Crazy busy.
you know, part of that is also the conversation. You know, we talk about tourniquets and life-saving efforts 10 years ago. This right here, what we're doing at this square table, was not happening 10 years ago.
No.
Wasn't happening 5 years ago. And this is what brings legitimacy to a podcast like ours, or to the roll call room. You know, and even William Young with corrections. These are honest conversations that we're having with peers, saying, "Look, you know, Todd's, you know, veteran like myself with the Air Force, and Dusty, you're here with the Army. We can have conversations with, you know, with same correlations." And same thing with first responders. We're saying, you know, yeah, this stuff messes you up. If you're messed up before you become a first responder, maybe you shouldn't be a first responder. If you really want to do that, you really better be active in therapy. And, you know, everybody's scared of medications, but sometimes medications are needed as long as they're controlled. And I mean, maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Sometimes they're needed, but it really takes an honest self-evaluation to get into a career with prior issues.
And that's one thing about medication, just to stem off that, it's a tool.
Right.
You know, I've worked with people, as I'm sure you have as well, that, okay, you know, I think medication would be good to start off with you.
Right.
But that's not the final.
Just to help. Yeah.
I'm not saying to go get the highest you can get. Nope, start at the lowest. This is a process. Find what works. And our goal in therapy is to eventually taper the medication back down to where you don't need it.
Sure.
And that's, you know, sometimes you may be on medication the rest of your life. Sometimes.
But, you know, my experience with the public that I deal with, and maybe yours too, that's a very small
Yes.
account of your clients
Mm-hmm.
That are on medication forever.
for life.
Forever.
Yeah,
Oh,
Right.
yeah, that's a small portion. Yeah,
you know.
most people can taper off
Hmm.
eventually. Now, I have seen cases where somebody's on them for a long time, probably because they didn't work through their stuff,
Right.
and are relying on the medication just because it's easier.
It helps. It's a crutch.
It's easier, yeah. But for the most part, yeah, I think generally and you're right, Dustin. The goal is to get off of them, not to stay on them.
Hmm.
And it is easier short term to stay on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing I want to make, so if you're on medication or you get prescribed medication, your goal is to not stay on them.
Right.
Your goal is to get the help you need. Now I'd like to turn a little bit more to what kind of tools do you have with an EMDR session? Kind of walk us through what an EMDR session would look like for someone.
Well, EMDR is interesting in that you don't. One of the kind of the cool things is if you're going through the session, like John, if you were going to do a session with me, you wouldn't have to tell me everything that happened. You can just do it in your mind, right? Like
Okay.
you can process that event again in your head.
Okay. You don't have to verbalize it.
You don't have to verbalize it.
Okay.
Yeah, which is different than talk therapy or narrative therapy or all that other stuff that we kind of work towards, right? So that's kind of the cool thing about it is you can do it that way. As the counselor, it becomes a little bit problematic for me because I still have to ask you like what's going on, right?
Right.
And kind of help lead you down a path
Mm.
inside that. But you don't have to verbalize it, which is really kind of nice.
And that's one thing that with veterans I've worked through with Warriors Hope is they don't want to verbalize it because I don't want my civilian therapist to know how truly messed up I am or to have their own trauma from it.
I'm going to be hospitalized after this.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the one thing I've worked with some. They're like, well, you're not going to call 911, are you? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, last time I verbalized it, my family went off the rails. I'm like, no, see, I'm not your family. We're in a safe setting.
Right.
This is where you're supposed to talk about it. And then near the end, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, we help you kind of package it back up and compartmentalize it until you're back there again. Because we don't want that spilling out while you're driving home.
Right. Well, that's one of the things we do in that resource development and implementation phase, that RDI phase, is one of the things we would do is we put a container in place. So you imagine a container where that you could put thoughts and emotions and pass things into that you can lock up and put away, get it out later if you need to. And we do that with the use of bilateral stimulation.
Okay.
So the interesting thing about this whole EMDR discussion is this. Francine Shapiro basically said in the 1970s she figured this out, right? But the reality is this is really, really old. And here's why. And here's what I kind of figured out in doing my research when I got my master's. So all research is me search, right?
Okay.
It's just it's the nature of the beast. So I'm doing my final projects on trauma and post-traumatic stress injuries. And another person in my class was doing the same thing. I did adventure therapy, right? So guys going out fly fishing. I was really curious about fly fishing because the veterans that do it seem to get a real big benefit out of it, right? So there's multiple components to that, right?
Social distancing at its best. You don't want to get close to somebody starting out fly fishing.
Right, exactly. But you're with a group of guys, so you're doing group therapy, you're on the water, you're outside, you're exercising, you're eating right. There's many components to that are really good. This other person in my class was doing Native American post-traumatic stress injury. What did the Native Americans do when they got done with a war? And they did drumming ceremonies. So I'm like, drumming and fly fishing. I wonder if the timing's the same. Like maybe it's timing, right? Well, come to find out, the timing of the drums and fly fishing is the same, but that's not what it is. It's bilateral stimulation. It's the bilateral stimulation of drumming, or stepping or walking or tapping, or fly fishing. Now the VA supposedly has picked up some guitar playing therapy thing. I don't know what they're doing. Somebody else told me about it. I have to check it out. But same thing. It's bilateral stimulation. Now
at least they're doing something.
Right. They're trying to do something, right? Yeah.
You know, so I'm staying quiet on this
Right.
one.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do, some therapists will do tapping, some will do sound, some will do a light bar. I use two little guys that vibrate back and forth in your hand.
Yes.
And I think that, and I've tried the other stuff for myself and for other people, but I feel like I get a better altered state with the little vibrator guys that go back and forth. But the reality is, any bilateral stimulation. So in doing my training for EMDR, one of the things that Linda Coran is who I trained with, she said in places where we've had big traumas, right? Tsunamis, tornadoes, they take a group of kids, right? And they paint a picture, what life was before the event, before the tornado came through, what life was like during the tornado, and what I want life to be like after the tornado, right? Hope for the future. And then they have each kid hold up their picture, and they talk about their picture while they're walking in place. And it's just the bilateral stimulation that helps create that change in our brains. For whatever reason, that's the way it works.
Now, we can see you do the tapping, the drumming. Explain bilateral stimulation.
Oh, okay.
for
So
me.
it's on either side of your body. So if you think of drumming, you're drumming with your left hand and your right hand back and forth. You're tapping on your legs, left and right, back and forth at whatever speed. Or sometimes we'll have people hug themselves. You tap your shoulders or your lat and your shoulder back and
That
forth.
one's for you, John.
I can't reach.
Ooh, this is a tough crowd. Right? So
I'm
that's
girthy.
what bilateral stimulation is. Now, I would also say do not go online and try to do this yourself. This is bad.
This
right?
is not a DIY.
This is not a DIY.
A DIY.
No. And it's also not for counselors, right? Like, go get the training if that's what you do for a living. Make sure
Yeah.
you're doing the right thing, right? And in terms of medication, too, I wanted to say, I've had, and you probably have too, had clients and patients come off medication without working with their doctors. Don't do that.
Right.
No,
Right.
you
Don't
thought
do
you were
it.
messed up before.
Yeah, don't do that.
Now you're messed up and you're going through withdrawal.
Yeah, don't
Right.
do that. Just don't. It's all bad.
Because the temptation obviously is there because you feel like you have things in control.
Yes.
You feel like you've handled everything and you're feeling pretty good.
I feel great. Let me stop taking my meds.
Right. Wrong. Train wreck.
Yeah, problem. Big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna you're gonna regressing fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people that, hey, things are going great. Well, don't do. Come back the next session. I'm like, all right, what changed? Well, I stopped my meds.
Well,
Right.
you know,
Come on.
Todd, look back to your police career. How many times were you called to a home for someone out of
Oh, yeah.
control, and come to find out it's not the assaultive behavior or whatever reason why we're there. It's the fact they quit taking their medications.
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely.
but then as soon as you put the handcuffs on, well, if I'm going to jail, I got to have my medications.
Right. Right. Wait,
Well,
they're in the
if you were
bathroom.
taking them, you might not have went today.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like going
Absolutely.
back to the ride along episode where that guy, you found out he was going in. Now everything hurt. Before you
Right.
asked him, "Is everything okay?" Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Well, you're going to jail. Oh, now this hurts.
Having a heart attack.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
classic one. Well, it's okay. Me too.
Right.
We're in this together.
Well,
just
at least at
chalking
the ER I
I'm
can
just
finish
chalking
my
it up
report.
as anxiety right now.
While I'm sitting at the ER, I can do my report.
Right. Bring my laptop in with me.
So, what's the importance of the bilateral? I mean, the most
Okay.
that I've seen was the light bar
Right.
or the handheld devices.
So nobody knows.
Ah, good answer. Great, we're done.
Perfect. That
Nobody
is the
knows.
most honest
It's
answer.
interesting, right? Because I just started doing some research on a podcast that I want to work on about masks and how horrible they are and why, right?
Correct.
And so in doing that research, I go to Live Science. I'm looking up like new information on the brain. I'm a brain guy. I want to know what's going on. And in I pull up a list from Live Science in 2019. I think it was 20 new things we learned about the brain in 2019. Like, it's crazy. The shit we don't know about the brain is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Right.
So, do you guys know who Michelle? I think his last name is Kaku. He's one of those ancient alien guys. He's the
Oh.
gray-haired Asian guy.
Oh no, but
He's
okay.
a physicist. So they ask him on one of the shows, what do we not know a lot about? And he says the Big Bang and the human brain. And it's so true. Like some of the things they found, the human brain, we just don't know a lot about it. So we don't know, and almost all of these psych meds too, we don't know the method of operation. We don't know why they work or how. We know what they do, but we don't know exactly why. So the short answer is we have some ideas, but we really don't know why this works. We know it does. And I'm not one of those guys that's going to be like, oh, it's because this. No, because you look online for any part of the brain, and you'll find 3 different things it does, right? So the amygdala either they'll say controls fight or flight response, or emotion, or the hippocampus controls emotion, but maybe it does this too. There are people running around with half a brain. Literally, no funny stuff, John.
I'm sorry,
right?
He's
but like
one of
half
them.
their brain completely gone and functioning normally,
and they shouldn't be.
and they shouldn't be. There's a lot we don't know about the human brain.
Now I know how my wife feels when I try to describe the car to her. She just knows it works.
Right, honey. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know how. I just know that it does. Okay.
So there's a component in your brain that gives us the ability to smell, right? It's these little nodule things, right? There are people, and this is one of the things I saw in this Live Science article. There are people running around that don't have those. They don't have any of those little nodules for smell, but they can still smell. They know what an orange smells like.
Unless
they
they
can
get
smell
COVID.
it. Yeah, unless they get COVID. Maybe they could if they didn't have the little nodule. I don't know.
Right.
But they don't know why they can still smell. They just know they can. There's a lot we don't know about the human brain.
Because I know that they've said, at least growing up and, even my master's, is like we only actively use a very, very small portion.
Yeah.
Some smaller than others, but very small portion of our actual brain. And then you get all the theories of, well, this leads to, but no, we don't know how some of those chemicals, I mean, even just in the last, I'd say 8 years, maybe the last decade, the Suboxone thing has come out for those with substance use. And I did substance use therapy at a Suboxone clinic. And
As a therapist, right?
As a therapist.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me do that. Well, it started out as a client. I was there so much. They just
Wasn't
said,
a
you can
patient.
stay.
That's usually how therapists go. They start out as patients and then become a. Never mind.
And hey, if you can't, teach.
Right.
If you're crazy, you'd probably be a good therapist. And it's just they don't know why it works, how it works. They just know it works.
Right.
And that's the thing with this EMDR is I kind of had an idea of your answer, but yeah, it's just one of those things that if it works, unless it's illegal or immoral to you, it works. Just go with it.
Yeah. So I will say that I've done some research online too about people who've had EMDR that it didn't work for or they had a bad experience. That's their self-reporting. I'm making air quotes here. I don't know what that therapist did or didn't do with them or what it looked like. Maybe they were put into it too fast. Maybe they weren't ready. Maybe there was I don't know the whole thing. But just make sure if it's something you're interested in that you want to go into, talk to the people doing it. Don't necessarily take your information offline. I mean, we know what the internet looks like.
Wait,
so.
are you telling me that the internet is not 100% correct?
Yes.
This is that 0.2% that's not correct.
Right.
But it's just like in every other therapy. Some works for some people where it doesn't for others.
So EMDR is a tool.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's what we've been trying to put out here. No offense to Pat, but the what did he call it?
Mindful meditation.
Mindful meditation. See, brain injury. Mindful meditation that he described, I don't feel it working for me. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, whatever. Maybe it's because I have 3 young kids or I'm undiagnosed ADHD, but that doesn't work. And just the same as this, yes, it's a professional thing. You've got to find a professional who is trained in it.
Right.
And it's just like any agency, any organization, not everybody will be good at it.
Right.
And so if you feel it's not working and they still want you to keep with it, you can have that conversation with your therapist and say, hey, I don't feel it's working. Let's get a game plan going.
Right.
It's like, I know for me, what's it called? Progressive exposure therapy. Yeah, I had somebody that was trained in it, certified, and on the second day they said, watch this video. And it was like, it was all flashbacks.
That's what I would need to go to Hopewell. Progressive. Right. I don't like horses. You're not gonna throw me on the horse right first trip.
You don't go on the horse.
Perfect. Can I eat it? Like no,
You
I'm
can
going
eat
off.
horse.
I'm
They
going
let
off
you
on
eat
a
it in
tangent,
Canada.
but yeah, horses are like the most useless animal. I don't need to ride it, right? I don't need to anymore. I'm not.
Jody,
you're
if
in
you're
Amish
listening to
country
this
right now.
I know. I
Jody,
can
if
hear
you're
the butter
listening
churning.
to this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's John, not me.
Right.
Right.
It
Dustin's like, I
needs
want
to
to
have
come
a
back.
purpose.
I want to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to be let back in the driveway.
By the way, in all seriously though, sincerities out to Hopewell, as I've seen one of their horses have
Yep, they
passed.
did lose a horse not this last week. It wasn't justice, so I'm still here.
All right.
Right.
That's we had on. I don't know if you've heard many of our podcasts, but we've had Hopewell Ranch out of near.
Weedman.
Well, they call it Wademan.
Sorry.
They named it wrong.
Right.
Not my fault. It's spelled the same as my last name and not pronounced right.
Outside of Mount Pleasant, right?
Yep, Mount Pleasant,
Oh, okay.
and it's equine therapy,
Equine therapy, yeah.
and it's very good. Like I went in completely, like John is now. There's, they're just animals, and came out, and I've wished they lived closer. So
But-
I've always told them, if justice that Mustang ever disappears, don't look at my place.
Well, and that's something that, like you said, to try and bring this back around. With our show, we try and bring different ideas
Yep.
To our veterans and our first responders and their spouses of therapy that's out there. Because a lot of people think that's the only thing that's out there is sitting on a couch and, talking to somebody while they write something down.
Right.
Says the guy sitting on my couch talking about his problems.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. Anyway, it's a comfy couch. I haven't fallen asleep yet, but
Well, I see you moved from the corner.
yes, I had to.
we came in and you plopped right down there. Never been in
Right.
this house before, and boom, there goes John.
Right. Well, come on.
It is a comfy couch.
It is. I observant, highly trained
Right.
and observant. Okay, found the smushiest spot and I found it, and I was happy.
Right.
But to bring this back around before
We
they're
do
picking
that a
on me, we bring these tools and ideas of different therapy options that are out there. Something like EMDR is probably thought of as more as like a shaman type deal compared to equine therapy. Like these are new. I know you said it's been around since the 70s, but it's not really been talked about.
Right.
For the common person, maybe
Right.
in therapy that has an interest in it. Yeah, you've studied it for a long time. But would you say EMDR is a last resort type therapy for someone? Or I guess, for our listeners, at what point would they say, oh, maybe I should try equine therapy? Oh, because, this is real big with service pets. But, how would someone find what works for them? What direction, if I have a listener?
That's a really good question, John. And I think the answer is what's your personality, right? Like and you guys seem the same way, kind of like one and done. Like I want to get this over with
Right.
and I want to hit it with a hammer and be done, right? I'm tired of dealing with my crap, and I want this fixed. Right.
I'm infantry, so if we can't get it with the hammer, we just blow it up.
Right, exactly. So I think that's
Please, I build bombs.
I know, you're the ones that helped us. You're an enabler. You enabled us to blow more stuff up.
Right.
I was
Sorry.
hoping that
That's a
would
good
come
one.
out your nose. I was
Yeah.
waiting for you to take that
You
drink.
built them, you used them, I found them.
Right.
We have the whole
Yeah,
trifecta
we do
here.
have the full circle. We did come around full circle again, John.
All we're missing is the EOD guy.
Yeah, if
People
those
are
aren't
taking them
available,
apart.
we just I won't say what we did, but that's okay. That's for another show, 100th episode.
No, I think to answer your question, I think the big thing is what's your personality, right?
Mhm.
Like, what do you think is going to work best for you? understanding that some things might take longer than others.
Mhm.
That's all.
So an open mind
Yeah, an open
Okay.
mind,
and a willingness to
Yeah.
really truly
a willingness to
healing.
give it a shot.
okay.
Right, whatever.
Because I'm
that
still
is.
stuck on the how the heck am I going to explain my fly fishing trip? And
Therapy.
It's therapy. A whole
Yeah.
weekend? Yes, it's
Perfect.
intensive.
Hey, I know a guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've got a pond. So.
Right. I don't want to be that close. But anyway, if I'm going to do therapy, it's going to be a ways away.
Oh, okay.
Like Tippy Dam. I'm just saying. But, with some of the things like that, I guess what I would be afraid of is like, let's take the fly fishing thing.
Yeah.
Conveniently.
Conveniently. I mean, even if we talked about equine therapy, with some people, they're going to be like, well, I want to do the equine. And then they go there and they just like animals. So they're completely missing the point of
Right.
the therapy of the animal as much as like, I like fishing.
Well,
So-
part of that's got to be you got to be self-reflective, right? You
Mhm.
have to be
Yeah.
able to go, this is helping me or not,
Okay.
or am I just having a good time?
And don't
Right.
just go to fly fishing just to fly fish.
Well, no, I'm going to eat.
Well, that too.
Okay.
But if you're going fly fishing to try it out and you're going by yourself, well,
Different deal.
that's a different deal. Like at, we were talking about Hopewell. They have a program. They have people who are there
Right.
to guide you. It's just like the therapy type setting where you're not just talking about last night's game in your therapy session. You're
Right.
talking about something that you're being guided to.
And that's what I want our listeners to understand is that this isn't something, I'm going to try fly fishing therapy.
Yeah, don't go. That's a lot of money to get into. Don't just
Well,
start spending.
yeah, that's like me saying I'm going to start duck hunting therapy. First, I better win the lotto. And the wife says I got to have the basement finished too, so I'm waiting on that. But
Well, if we're going duck hunting, I'll come over and help you.
but I just had an idea, but we won't put that on the air. But yeah, so
Yeah.
those are all great ideas, and
There's lots of things out there, but figuring out what fits you the best is kind of up to you. Like, what's your personality? What's it look like? Finding the right person to talk to, I think, is the most important step. Like somebody that's a trauma-informed therapist,
sure,
somebody that really works with trauma and understands it.
And asking the right questions beforehand. If
Yeah.
you call an organization and they say, yes, we have trauma-informed therapists here. Okay, that's step one. How many people have they worked with? Well, you'll be number one. Okay, nothing against that therapist, but I would not recommend that if you're
well,
wanting
somebody's
to
got
get
to be number one.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be number two like you, Dusty.
Well, I've gone through quite a few. Okay, you're doing hand signals there. What do you
Doing
want?
a hand signal. I wanted to get to a stopping point. I was hoping to find a natural stop, and you guys kept talking.
Well, I guess this
Okay,
is natural.
so
too.
here's our natural stopping point.
We're at the hour mark. Do we have another hour in us?
I could talk all day, fellas. So whatever you want to do. We
Okay.
can stop here.
We get paid to talk all day. Okay?
Right. All right. So this is what I want to do then.
Join us for part 2.
Right. Let's do a part 2.
Yeah. I was waiting for a good edit spot.
Join us for
It's right
part
here.
2.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna split this one up into 2 parts as well, and we'll see you on the next one.